Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Thriving in Intersectionality podcast. And as always, before I bring in my guest for today, Yosi, I'm going to talk about intersectionality a little bit. What is intersectionality? Of course, the title of the podcast, I'd love to take a minute to make sure people have a little bit of understanding of what that word means. Intersectionality is a framework that recognizes how multiple aspects of identity, such as our background, our culture, our lived experience, our professional journey, and even personal challenges can interact to shape how we experience the world and how we lead within the world. So this framework, I came into the word intersectionality through the work of Kimberly Crenshaw, and she explored race and gender and the intersections of those two. But I also use this framework as a way for us to explore leadership, not just as a skill, but as something that is shaped by our perspective, our growth, and our experience. And so I'm always excited to dig a little bit into the layers that my guests bring into their work before we talk about their work. Hence the theme, the title, Thriving in Intersectionality. So how are you doing today, Yosi?
I'm doing very well, Lola. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Of course. So a little bit about Yosi Kossowsky. Yosi is a dedicated executive coach with over 18 years of experience, complemented by more than 30 years in executive leadership roles, including positions such as Chief Technology Officer and Senior Director of Talent Management. He's got a deep journey and is specialized in leadership development, navigating interpersonal conflict, and addressing complex issues like gender, race, and cultural diversity. And I'm looking forward to getting behind the scenes and understanding a little bit of how Yosi got to where he is today before we talk a little bit about his work. So welcome, Yosi, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
All right, let's dive right in. So when you think of the word intersectionality, and my audience will get to read your bio, your impressive bio, which I know 30 plus years is hard to squish into 30 minutes, but we're going to try to touch on some highlights of how you got to doing the work. And I think a lot of people, when we read people's resume and we see what they are doing, we don't really think about how they got there and how it's been shaped. And so I think that's the beauty of the kind of conversations I try to get people to think about, maybe something you haven't thought about in a while. But when you think of the word intersectionality, Yosi, for anyone that is listening, and maybe the only intro they have to you is your bio, what are some intersections that have really shaped your journey so far that you would like people to recognize? What part of your identity have been key for you?
So what's interesting, Lola, is, looking back tells a very different story than looking in the present.
Yeah.
And experiencing what life is in that moment without being able to have the retrospective of the intersections and that intersectionality, those connections.
Yeah.
And from the seat that I'm in today, looking back at my life, there is so many intersections. There are so many things that what I viewed at the time as overwhelming challenges, as painful experiences, all have played a huge role in who I am today. And I can't say if I would have traded it for something else. I don't know. I do wish that I had more tools and resources when I was younger to have viewed those events differently. So just to give you some highlights of that, when I was going into third grade, well, I'll just say it as it is and then the learning. I didn't know how to read yet. And I didn't know at the time that was a problem, but it was a problem. And the school system that I was in told my mother that I was learning disabled and needed to go to a special, some other school where they could help me. And my young self interpreted that as I'm broken, I'm retarded, I'm stupid. And that played a very large role in really my self view for many, many years. And another one was, as I guess I was in my teens, the input that I picked up from certain family members was, I better go into a hands-on type of skill set, be an electrician or a plumber, a mechanic. And I was very good at hands-on and I loved it. But at the time, I just took that as, guiding sense, not necessarily recognizing that it was also creating belief systems in me and attitudes and mindsets that would really kind of shape what I thought was possible for me and what I didn't think was possible for me. And then another one was when a group of friends of mine after high school convinced me, no, I do need to go to university. Like, you have to go to university. And I'm like, well, how am I going to go to university? And they all helped me cram for the SATs. And I did get into a city college. And all of a sudden, for the very first time in my life, and I still don't know what shifted, I started passing my classes, because all throughout high school, I don't think I ever passed a class at all. And all of that just constantly reaffirmed that, of course, I'm stupid. Of course, and I didn't even think about, why didn't the school hold me back? Like, I didn't know to ask any of those questions. And then I got married, and I had a couple of summer jobs, and then I fell into IT in the early days of IT. And again, this was kind of like a hands-on, but it also was very technical, and it all very much clicked with me. But what stayed with me throughout all of this time was, I'm stupid, and I'll never know enough, and I'll never be good enough. And if someone were to, give me feedback about mistakes that I've made or not, it was an instant acceptance, because of course I didn't know. Of course I'm wrong. Of course I wouldn't be the person to have the answers. And what I finally happened was, I got to a point where something inside of me said, you know what? The only thing that's going to keep me safe is trying to find out as much as I can about anything that I'm doing. And so I geeked out completely as an IT person and learned as much as I possibly could. I did 2 years as a pre-technical sales role. I learned as much about sales as I possibly could. And then I went into engineering, and I learned as much as I possibly could. Another challenge that was going on was that I've had autoimmune issues. I don't know if you know what autoimmune is, but it's different health challenges that don't necessarily have clear indications of what their root causes are. And they have lots of symptoms from psoriasis or multiple sclerosis, Crohn's, a whole bunch of things. And so in the early 2000s, my wife convinced me to start seeking out alternative therapies, Chinese medicine, herbology, etc. And that ultimately became a lead into becoming a therapist. And I went into studying emotional wellness therapy because in my day job, I started getting feedback that I wasn't really a good people person. I was very good as an engineer, but I wasn't really great when trying to take a role as a technical leader or as a manager. And again, I was in this mindset of really wanting to know. And so in the alternative space, starting from about 2001, as I would be going to an alternative practitioner, I decided I was going to study that therapy that they were doing on me to really understand how does it work, why does it work, and all of that. And so when I got this feedback that I wasn't really good at people, I'm like, okay, so I need to just learn everything I can about people. What makes people work? What makes people tick? Why am I not a good communicator? What does it take to be a good listener? And as I went into the emotional wellness therapy work, it was all really to understand why I didn't understand. The gift of it was it brought all of the intersectionality together. Mm-hmm. I learned about my emotions. I learned how to understand them, how to name them. I learned where some of the roots of them were coming from, how so many of my belief systems were limiting belief systems about myself, about life, about possibility. And I learned how to start to undo so many of those hooks of me being stupid, me being worthless, me being never good enough. And I've never been able to transition into the other side where I'm amazing, I'm awesome. Not there.
You are.
But I remember the experience of like intentionally letting go of so much of this baggage and starting to see that this mindset that I don't know has played a major role in everything that I've been able to achieve, because it's created a foundation for curiosity. Or rather than assuming I do know, for always wondering, what don't I understand here? What am I missing? And it's made me super curious. And because I was super curious and I wanted to study more, I wanted to learn about the alternative therapies. I wanted to learn about people. I wanted to learn about what makes a good communicator. I wanted to learn and understand what brings about conflict between people and how that can be resolved. And at any time that people would give me input or direction, completely open to it, because that mindset never shifted. What did shift was I didn't have to beat myself up over it.
Yeah.
And so the intersectionality, and I love that that's what you're focusing on, is huge. And again, the gift of the hindsight rather than the foresight on it.
I know. Don't we all wish we understood when we were going through it? But yeah. I love what you shared, though. I love hearing about your journey, because someone once said, well, we're all walking traumas. We're all walking traumas from all of the things that have happened to us. Yeah. And I think what you shared is also probably why you're very good at what you do, because a lot of when it comes to executive leadership and individuals, is not even being open to feedback, to understanding what you don't know and thinking you know everything. So thank you for sharing that. Even your learning journey and the processing, I think it's kind of already trickled into your career a little bit, but looking at some of the titles you've had, like Chief Technological Officer, I see the geek side of things. Yeah. And I was looking at your profile too, right? Is now working at that space where you are helping turn the geeky side to connect it, bridge that gap with the people side. And that really resonates with me, because I come from a science background as well, scientist, and that was the world that I was in. And it was always like, well, they are the people, and then they are the scientists and the technical people. And I'm like, well, but we're all people, and we all have to work together. Right. We all live within this system. Why are some people the tech people? We all need people skills. So I thought that was interesting. I think it was on your LinkedIn ad saying that bridge between technical and people. And so Can you walk us through that part, how your career journey? That's what I'm trying to say. I got a little hint of it from some of the things you were sharing about your intersections, what has shaped you. But give us a little bit about your career journey and the choices that you made, maybe transitions along the way within corporate America and also into entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. Thank you. So as I mentioned, I started off my career in IT. I did that for, I think, about 8 years or so, then 2 years in pre-technical sales, and then moved into engineering. And few years into that role, as I mentioned, I started getting feedback that I didn't necessarily have the best people skills. And that then led for me to choose as the next topic I was studying in the alternative world about emotional wellness therapy. And while I was studying that, I stayed in my day job being an engineer. And yet the knowledge of uncovering all of that baggage that I was carrying around really started to shift me, because I started becoming more emotionally aware of my emotions, my impact, really how to have more presence and more patience with people. And so that started shifting my relationships at home and at work. And then in the middle of that, the geek in me, kind of flared up again. And I became really curious about what is the role of our brain on behaviors and decision making. Like New Year's resolutions, we go there and we say, oh yeah, I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to lose weight or whatever. And then it doesn't last more than just a few weeks before that resolution falls off. And I'm like, why is it that our brain, which is the command center, doesn't drive behaviors? And so that led me to study behavioral neuroscience as well. And between this mishmash of the emotional wellness work and the behavioral neuroscience, I started forming this like model in my mind about how do we work. How, not specifically, like if I think about it as a computer, so you have the computer, and which is the hardware, and then you have the software, whether it's Windows or Mac or something. And so what I started recognizing was that the hardware has a lot of similarities, and where a lot of the unique things are coming in is in the versions of the software. How we all have different cultures and our genders and our outlooks and our ways of showing up. And as I started understanding that, the value of being able to apply that knowledge to helping people became much more enticing. And I remember when I finished my certifications, still working in my day job, I really did want to help leaders, but I didn't want to change my job. And so I got certified as a coach, or the first of my certifications at the time, and just thought of this as a side gig. And then a year and a half later, so around the end of 2013, the company I was in got acquired by Cisco. And for us, the acquisition was very challenging, very difficult from a people culture perspective. We didn't really understand how to take this small company and fit into this large company, how to make the culture shift. And I remember feeling like I had tools and skills that I could help on the people side, but not knowing how to make that transition. And I remember one night, the engineering team, we were all out together having, dinner. And I'll be honest, I had a few glasses of wine. So I was feeling a little more relaxed. And I said to my boss, this desire that I had that I was so afraid to tell him that like I wanted to do this work. But I'm like, I just blurted out that I want to offer coaching to the executive leadership team of our acquisition. And he was like, yeah, go for it. And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, what? And he supported me in my pitch to the executive team of offering them coaching. And about 80% of the group, there was about 15 leaders, about 80% of them took me up on this offer. And for the next few months, I started coaching them. And a number of them really told me how transformational it was. And that led ultimately HR to offer me a role in doing human development work as a full-time role. And the focus was really on helping the acquisition, both the leaders and the employees, really integrate into Cisco. I didn't think of it as a job or a career move or anything like that, but I've never gone back. And so then I spent the next 6 years working really across the world, because Cisco's a global company, with leaders and teams on helping them go through change, whether it was helping the engineering team go to something called Agile, or whether it was rolling out new leadership competencies, whether it was helping people with their performance management, whether it was helping leaders and teams become more integrated, and really also how to work cross-culturally. And so I had this opportunity in spending a lot of time outside of the US in Mexico and Canada and England, France, Germany, Israel, India, Hong Kong, and learning the role of culture and gender and generation on how is it that impacts communication skills, on conflict, on teaming, on all the unity. And for me, a lot of it was before DEI became a buzzword or a big thing, was really just understanding how is it that we do or don't integrate, and how do our biases play a role, which is a normal part of our brain development, is forming biases.
Yeah.
And when I left Cisco at the end of 2020, I'm like, what do I do with this funny mix of engineering and all these people things? And so that's where I went and got the role as an HR leader in talent management, and it ended up not being the best fit for me, mostly because I didn't have, I think, a solid HR background. And then I got offered this chief technology officer role, and it was really interesting to kind of like culminate my corporate career in this role of seeing myself back in technology in a senior leadership role, and bringing all of these skill sets and seeing how that played out. And it was an amazing, amazing experience. But at the end of the day, what I realized was I wasn't feeling as excited about what I was doing as I did when I was doing the leadership development work. Mm-hmm. And so that's what really led me to say, I'm hanging up my corporate hat and I'm going to go spend my full time working with people and their teams on really helping them learn more about themselves. And as a geek, it wasn't a natural space for me to understand how to translate these human skills into behaviors. I understood them theoretically, I understood them logically, but I didn't understand them behaviorally. And all of that training in the emotional wellness work and the behavioral neuroscience really created that bridge for me. And that's what I now use to help other people in making those bridges.
Wow, very interesting journey, interesting part. And I think, yeah, you definitely answered the questions I had, because I was like, how does an engineer end up with talent development? And then, I mean, the CTO piece kind of made sense, but I actually thought that came before talent development. Right. And I think even listening to you is also kind of, you can look back and see how each of those roles prepares you for what you're doing now. Because now you've been in the engineer space, you've been in the engineer mindset, you've walked through your own personal journey as an engineer, struggling with the behavioral, and then coach the leaders in the corporate space in a different way, which I think is also kind of unique, because you didn't even make the transition yet, but you were already doing the work internally. Go ahead.
It's very funny because sometimes when I'm meeting with people, they're like, how do I plan my career? And it's actually not something I have a good answer for, because I didn't plan my career.
And that's one of the most common things I hear from my guests. And I try to tell students, don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. Do what, feels right to you right now. Because the next 2-3 years, who knows, what roles or what instincts you're going to have, or what roles are going to exist, right?
Absolutely.
We'll all come together. Yeah. I still remember being in my early 20s, finishing, and I had a boss who was HR talent development too, kind of mentoring me, and he gave me this employment and outlook tool. You remember that? There was this
Yeah.
employment outlook that I was kind of predicting. And I was like so stressed out trying to figure out, okay, what does my career map look like? Like I'm trying to map this perfect. I'm going to do these and then I'll go into these. And I was so stressed out because I felt like, oh my gosh, I can't figure out what I'm passionate about or what I'm excited about. But yeah.
So true.
Yeah, thank you so much for walking us through your journey. I love that. And I'm glad you also shared about, of course, I'm an immigrant and I work with a lot of immigrants, also people that moved out of the US to work in other places. So I definitely will be curious to ask about what were some of the insights you got from working with people outside the US, different cultures in the corporate space. What are some of the things you noticed and the nuances that you bring, that you think that experience has brought to your work right now?
Yeah. So first of all, you've got language. And outside of the US and England, English is not a first language for the rest of the world. And that means the way in which but and I'm not good at languages at all. I'm really not, Lola. I'm terrible. And yet what I have learned has shown me that English is not a gender-based language, right? We don't have specific words for or pronouns, not pronouns, verbs or whatever that we would use for he and she. But in French and Arabic and Hebrew and probably many other languages, they do. And also the structure of words is very, very different. And so the way that we learn language affects a lot of the way we think and put ideas together. And then there's this whole idea of context. There's high context cultures and lower context cultures. And high context cultures aren't driven to ask the same level of detail of questions up front as low context cultures are. And it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just a cultural influence and nuance. The context, the concept of what shows respect and disrespect is very different in different cultures. Indirect communicators versus direct communicators. So Americans tend to be very indirect communicators. We tend to not tell everybody exactly what we think or feel. On the other hand, a lot of other cultures are very direct communicators. A lot of people in England tend to use sarcasm, but not in a overt way, but just almost in a covert way, where Americans, that tends to be too much of a subtlety on it. And so what that translates to in practical is sometimes we take offense too quickly from how we interpret other people. Secondly, we overly judge or misunderstand what people are saying, especially in written communications. And lastly, we don't necessarily take into account when I am especially trying to collaborate, give assignments or instructions, that the way, especially based on context, the way that people will interpret and ask questions is very, very different. And it's the fact that high context cultures will not ask for detail isn't that they're a bad communicator. It's that they don't think that way. And when an American doesn't provide the detail because they don't feel like they're being asked, and then they don't get the result that they want, then that creates a conflict. But it's a conflict that is easily resolvable if we start to understand cultural nuances. So ultimately, the primary mindset that I tend to guide people around is curiosity. What if you could never assume? What if you could not assume that the other person actually does understand you? What if you could not assume that they're mind readers and that they understand the context that you haven't shared? What if you cannot assume that you know their motives behind their behaviors, their actions, their decision making? What if you just don't know? What shifts in how you interact, in how you communicate, in how you respond if you're approaching your interactions from what if all my assumptions are wrong?
I love it. I was still stuck on the gender translation thing. I was born and raised in Nigeria, so my first language is Yoruba. And I was thinking about this because I was having a conversation with someone recently. Like, I don't know at what point I started thinking in English first. I've only been in the US. How long have I been in the US? 2009. I can remember. So not even half of my life yet, I guess. Yeah, so I spent more years in Nigeria, which is where I was born and raised. Granted, I did learn English in Nigeria. So the first few years being in the US, I remembered translating things from Yoruba to English to communicate. And now it's like this natural instinct where you're trying to translate English to Yoruba. And I was explaining that to someone like, oh, there's some things I still have to say in Yoruba because I don't know how to, it's not a literal translation. And you just answered it by, example, gender. Like gendered pronouns, it's not the same in my language. Like there are terms that are respect-based and then reference-based for he or she. Like there's no he, she, they, them. They, them in Nigerian language would probably mean a respectful term. Right. So I was like, oh my God, it's so amazing how so many things we work off this English, American English is the premium. But you're right, like English is only the first language in how many countries? And so many people have to do translations in different directions depending on where they are.
Right. Yeah. And another thing that's so interesting is the assumptions we make about what people will understand and don't understand, especially if people don't ask. But in certain countries, it's not culturally polite to ask questions if things were not offered, right? Like you're saying about that higher, like the whole idea of respectful language levels.
Right.
And so therefore, like people say, well, why didn't you ask me? And the people from these cultures, like, what do you mean? Why didn't I ask you? How could I possibly ask you? That's not respectful to ask.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of why hopefully people are more curious about culture when it comes to the workplace is also we've all stopped living in a bubble. We're in a globally connected world now. I mean, it's not a phrase. It's not a ChatGPT phrase. It is a real thing. We're all so connected right now. The world is global, and there's nowhere where it becomes even more obvious than in the workplace. Because most people, even if you work for a local company, you're selling globally. You are working with people that are from all over the world, and you spend more time with your coworkers than with your family. So you have to understand different cultures, or the conflicts are just going to keep happening.
Absolutely. And it's honestly why I didn't want to go into therapy. I wanted to go into coaching was because I saw how challenging it is to live in the workforce and feel like you need to put on a persona and try to navigate these challenges. But it doesn't mean, oh, I need therapy. No, but you do need guidance. You do need that somebody who has studied these things and understands these nuances to give you input, to share ideas and learnings so that you can navigate this better. And I'm really glad that coaching has picked up in the world and has become more of a known, element in the business world. And yet, still, if we're not exposed to these nuances of the culture and the gender and the generational areas, how do we address them? If we're not aware of what is these underlying drivers that play a huge role in how we respond and react, then how do we help shift that? because the one huge thing that really impacted me was knowledge doesn't necessarily translate to doing. Knowledge doesn't mean you know how to change your behaviors or your reactions. That is a whole element of work in and of itself. And especially with AI today, knowledge is cheap, meaning being able to ask an AI, how do I do something? You'll get the answers. How do I make that into a behavior shift? AI still doesn't know how to tell you to do that.
Oh my gosh, that is so funny. Well, thank you so much, Yosi, for chatting with me today. Thank you for the work you're doing. And thank you for really diving into the depth of why you do what you do. I also think I didn't, before I left corporate America, coaching, I saw coaching as something for executives. And so I still think coaching is underutilized in the workplace. I think, people talk about mentoring all the time. Mentoring, yeah, that's great. But, a mentor can only mentor you on something they've experienced and guide you in a specific thing. That's very different from coaching. And I think people are not fully leveraging coaching yet. And there's no place where I see a bigger need for it than in the workplace, in the corporate workplace. So, love to explore, maybe wrap up with for leaders and professionals who are feeling stuck right now, or maybe navigating workplace conflict and communication challenge. What are a few things that you will give them as advice to walk away with, and then also share with us, how can we reach you? How can people work with you?
Absolutely. Here's the experiment. The experiment is spend a day with a mindset of, what if I am wrong? What if my assumptions today are wrong? What if I don't assume that when I ask the person, do you understand? Do you have any questions? And they say no, that they really understand me? What if the attributions that I say, oh, they should know this, whatever, right? They know, they should know. Why didn't they do that? And then I stop and I like, but what if I'm wrong? What if this question is the wrong question to be asking? What if they really don't know? What can I do better? What if I didn't assume? What questions can I ask? What if I want to make sure and validate that people really understand me in the way that I want them to? How can I check that? That's what I would ask people listening to this podcast to do. Do it at home, do it with your family, do it with your friends, do it at work, and just see what you get. Treat it as an experiment where it's about learning what you learn from trying this practice.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's powerful and fractional and actionable enough to walk away with. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And in terms of where people can find me, the place right now is LinkedIn, because I'm still working on my website, which will be my whole name.com once it gets there. But for now, to please go to LinkedIn. There's a button to book time with me. Anyone can get 30 minutes call just to, talk and learn more about maybe how I can help them.
Yeah, and definitely connect there. I will, if you're listening on whatever platform, check the show notes. I'll drop Yosi's LinkedIn link there. And thank you for the offer for people to chat with you. And I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's feedback, who's listening to these, and some of the changes that you're going to make even from this one conversation. Before I wrap up, I have a fun question that I like to close with. So, Yosi, if you were to share a meal or a dish with your co-workers, what would it be, and why did you pick what you picked?
It would be sushi, and it's because I love sushi. It's my favorite. My top favorite foods are sushi and pizza. So they don't necessarily go together in one.
Both go together. Meal. I know. I love it.
And I love sushi really because of the conglomeration of flavors that come together. Between the rice and the nori and the vegetables, and I love raw fish. I don't know. I really do love it. So it would be sushi.
Okay, sushi and pizza. No, just kidding.
And pizza.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, Yosi. Thank you for, your authenticity and vulnerability of even sharing your own path, your identity path and journey to the work you do. And I think it also shows kind of the depth that you bring into your work. So again, we meet people, we kind of see the work they are doing. That's the front facing. And I really love to dive behind the scenes to understand why you do what you do. I think you walked us through that journey pretty well. So thank you very much for being here, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Lola. It's really been wonderful being on your show.